This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network. Blueberry.com is where listeners and podcasters come together. Check it out at blueberrywithnoease.com.
So the Earbud U podcast, while fun to put together and fun to have people interview for, doesn't really run for free. All of this stuff costs money, from equipment to distribution, well, to basically everything. And while we're happy to now be a member of the Blueberry Network, we'd like you to check out something for us. Look, if you're thinking about engaging with podcasting either now or in the future, and you've been kind of stuck on a hosting company or you don't really understand what a hosting company does, Blueberry is for you. Look, there are a lot of podcast distribution companies out there, and they're going to make you a lot of promises. But Blueberry offers three things that made it my go-to when I started the Earbud U podcast. Number one, convenience. Look, with PowerPress plugin and with WordPress integration, it works with around 90% of all websites that are already out there. Number two, optimization. Yeah, it took me a while to accept that Apple and iTunes pretty much rule the roost when it comes to podcasting. But after I came to that realization, then Blueberry was great in making everything easy. Finally, number three, publishing and distribution is simple. Look, I have a lot of stuff going on in my life, in case you didn't know. I design corporate trainings, I give speeches, I blog, and occasionally I get to see Mrs. Earbud U and the kids. But with Blueberry, publishing my podcast was done and over in 3 easy steps. No muss, no fuss, no bother. Look, head on over to blueberry.com. That's Blueberry, BLUBRRY.com, no E's, and type in the promo code earbud_U. And they'll give you a month of hosting service for free. And it's on me. A month of service for free. Look, you can't beat that with a stick. That's blueberry.com, BLUBRRY, and promo code earbud_U. And now, on with the show. Consulting and training is really hard, but not for the traditional reasons that you would think. As a consultant and trainer, I have sat in on a lot of meetings. I've been to a lot of meetings. I've held a lot of meetings. I've facilitated a lot of meetings with people in organizations who have all kinds of power, from positional power to transactional power in those organizations. And if you were a fly on the wall for some of those conversations and you were sitting on the outside, well, a lot of those conversations, well, they have the flavor and the tone of interviews. Now, this is a distinction with a difference, a situation and a conversation versus an interview, and I've actually had my wife try to correct me on this distinction with the difference, but then she got distracted by my quote-unquote cute butt. So the really, really hard part of consulting and training, though, is not what the public sees. It's not even what the client sees. It's really determining what the client needs, even though what they say they want is not always what they need. Then the corollary hard part of that is developing a product for people who are part of that consultant or trainer's business network, who may not be able to afford their services, may not yet know that they need their services, or may not feel comfortable directly reaching out to the consultant and trainer. Our guest for Earbud U today, Dianne Crampton, has discovered the solution to all of this. Welcome to the show. This is Earbud U Season 2, Episode number 4, A Special Edition. Dianne lives and works in Oregon, so maybe it's something in the startup air that's, wafting up from San Francisco and Los Angeles and Silicon Valley and all those other points south. But Dianne has managed to do some hard work and has gotten some attention for her work doing the really, really hard parts of being a consultant and trainer. The other part of developing a consulting product, just like the hard part of developing any product, is getting funding for that product. And we're going to talk about Dianne's efforts with with Indiegogo. So go to this. I want you to do something for me. I want you to go to Dianne's Indiegogo page. I want you to go to the Tiger Success Indiegogo page. I want you to donate a few bucks and help Dianne, as a consultant, productize a service that really matters. Trust us, leadership is as important to resolving conflict as practical skills are. Well then, that's it. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Earbud U, Season 2, Episode number 4, A Special Edition. Get your knowledge on through your earbuds. Our special guest for our show today is Dianne Crampton. Dianne is the founder of the Team Development and Cooperative Work Culture, and she's the consultant with Tiger Success Series. Now, Dianne works with HR, project managers, and executives desiring a collaborative work culture or team dynamic, and she uses 360-degree work culture surveys and strategic team development resources. Dianne trains, licenses, and certifies qualified executives to use diagnostics and Tiger's team development resources to develop and improve cooperation on teams, projects, and moving forward change efforts. Now, in my introduction to this podcast episode, I mentioned about, and I talked a little bit about successfully productizing a service for a consultant. And clearly Dianne has managed to successfully productize one of the hardest services to productize, and that's leadership development. Now, she'll walk us through the process of transforming a service into a process, and she'll tell us more about her very exciting launch of an Indiegogo-based funding campaign for her latest project. Welcome to Earbud U, Dianne.
Well, thank you, Jesan. It's really great to be here, and I look forward to sharing some great ideas today.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here, and we're glad to have you on the air. And so for the benefit of the Earbud U listeners, what is it that you do exactly? Because I know I gave you that whole long opening and a whole long, very friendly intro, but why don't you tell the listeners in your own words, what do you do exactly?
Well, it's pretty simple, Jesan. I help committed leaders who are committed to building work communities that people actually enjoy returning to after a couple of days off. I read a shocking statistic years ago that the highest number of heart attacks occur on Sunday evening or early Monday morning. And this tends to coincide with people having the weekend off and then dreading returning to work. And that hasn't changed much since I started my company nearly 2 decades ago. So we build work cultures and communities that people actually enjoy returning to after a couple of days off.
Awesome. Now, when I think of the work that you're doing, and when I think of how you describe it, and you talk about developing and building a work culture to which people want to return, I often think of some other folks that I've read, like the marketer Seth Godin and some other folks who talk about building a life that you don't want to take a vacation from.
Well, and it's much like that because, when people are happy and engaged in what they do, and it could be as simple as sorting cherries on a production line, I mean, it doesn't have to be rocket science. When that work environment is constructed in a way where people feel like they have some value and that what they're doing is making a difference.
And
it changes.
Yeah.
It makes work play.
And
and we're all about creating those types of environments that make that possible.
Now, I work and I consult throughout upstate New York, as well as northern Pennsylvania, and a good chunk of Ohio. Okay, that's sort of my range. Now, a lot of the organizations with whom I work when I do corporate consulting or corporate training around conflict engagement, which is a very narrow niche, really I'm going in when there's, when I guess I'm getting to the organizations before you get to them, where the work is not play, where the work is work. So talk to me how do you transform an organization? Because there are still some jobs. I mean, we all know about work cultures like Google and things like that, where, hey, we've got bouncy balls, that kind of stuff. But, but for a person who's working in an average 9 to 5, how do you make work culture fun? How does the Tiger Success Series do that? How does the work that you've done over the last 20 years contribute to that?
Well, I think, when you look at fun, it doesn't have to be a goofball thing.
Right.
You don't have to be shooting rubber bands at one another and, it's chaos and all these things are going off. I think what makes work fun is when people realize that the people that they're working with are trustworthy. They're trustworthy. What that does is it reduces what I call this edge component that separates people from the culture that they're working with, so that they can work more interdependently. They're not in a position where work is a devastating, grueling, backbiting, climb one person over another to get something done. And I think the environment is what makes people creative. It allows for people to express their individuality and their strengths. If it's an organization that really mines for those strengths, it gives people an opportunity. That begins to build the type of work relationships that people forge, because people don't quit businesses because they don't get paid enough. People quit businesses because they don't like the people that they work with, whether it's a boss or it's a coworker. So we discovered, and it was a very difficult process actually in discovering what the components are that create a culture that enables that employee to find fun in work. I call it flow. It's as though, you're doing your work and you get lost in it because you enjoy doing it. And it can be menial work. It doesn't have to be you're saving the world or developing a new vaccine or anything like that. It can be editing a paper that somebody else has written in the office, but that's because it's your strength and you love doing that. And you're recognized for that. That makes the difference between whether work is fun or you can get into the flow of your work. It's like time just happens so fast. The day goes.
The day goes. Yeah. I mean, that's...
because you're engrossed in it. You're engaged in it.
Yep. That's the Mihaly... And I always butcher his last name, but you know who I'm talking about, the Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I always butcher the last name. I can't say it, but he and I write a little bit about flow, and I talk a little bit about it, particularly when we're talking about conflict at work, because conflict, at least in my little silo that I've got, like I said, I'm there before you show up. Like, you come in after I do. But really talking about how to break apart that conflict and get people into flow so that they can really be, and I like the word you used, creative. And, really reinforcing that fun doesn't have to be, like you said, snapping rubber bands and everybody, hitting each other with water hoses and that kind of stuff. But it could be a place where a person could be fulfilled through meaning and mattering.
Exactly. And fun doesn't have to be off the chart goofy. I mean, it can be, it's just because you enjoy it.
Right.
And you enjoy the people that are working around you.
Yeah.
In work culture, a lot has been written about how do you achieve your goals and, SMART goals and on, great trainings around that area, and how to fill roles and what you do in your role. I think when I came onto the scene, and even now, the relationship side of the strength that a company has, I call it the golden triangle: roles, goals, and relationships. It was the relationship piece that I don't know, maybe it was just too messy for people to deal with, but that is at the root core of the programs that we develop to make the work culture a place that people enjoy returning to.
Now, Dianne, over the last 20 years, and clearly this is a long career, so you're not, I just started consulting, 3 years ago, so I'm a babe in the woods compared to you. So let's break this down a little bit, or compared to your experience. In the 20 years that you've been working, have you seen a shift in how work cultures look at that last part of the golden triangle? I love how you put that, the relationship piece. And have you felt as though you've been sort of riding that wave or leading that wave?
I think the wave is still coming. Hey, son,
Okay.
I do. I think the wave is still coming. Fortunately, we have a huge demographic of people who are in their 30s,
Hmm.
who aren't going to put up with work cultures that are demeaning.
Right.
And up to
I agree with
now,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it's this culture. The baby boomers changed how we buy things. I mean, it
Hmm.
was a huge group. Well, the millennial generation is a big one too, and I think
Yep.
it will change the world of work. And some of our history, some of our work history, is involved in launching the type of learning processes within how people in this age group and demographic learned and what their expectations are. And and so I think in many ways the wave is still coming. We've caught a couple of them,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
it's been I haven't seen too many changes. We have progressive leaders who have taken the helm, like the Tony Shays and others
Hmm.
who are creating dynamic work cultures where creative people
Yep.
can thrive.
Yep.
Google and all of this. I mean, really dynamic leaders, more of them. But we still have these lumbering organizations that can't
Yes.
change. That, in
Hmm.
fact, we did a survey. This was a few years ago, and I surveyed well over 1,800 HR directors with companies across the globe. And I wanted to know if team building is a waste of time.
Oh, that's a provocative question.
Oh, yeah. And it was really,
I actually I did a little team building last week, so I would like to know the answer to this.
well, and it was
This,
interesting because there's a difference between team building and team development. When you approach it
right.
as a consultant and developing the capacity for your clients to resolve conflict more effectively, you're
Hmm.
developing their capacity to do
Right.
so. And development and just doing a fun day with people away from work that offers no change can actually build resentment. And so,
Yeah.
but what was interesting to me as the size of these organizations broke down, the most dynamic opportunities for leaders today are in small to medium sized businesses.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so people in the 30s demographic are greatly positioned now to create stellar organizations.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the larger the organization is, the less will there is to change. So even
Yes.
though it makes sense to create a culture that people do want to return to, you have too many entrenched people who will not allow it to happen.
Have you? And these are all great points. I mean, you're literally singing my language. This is why I wanted to get you. I wanted to get you on.
Eh,
Um, have you run across the work of? And then we'll get back to the Indiegogo campaign. We're going to talk about the Tiger Success Series. We're going to talk about your new project. We're going to talk about all that. But I want to ask you. Um, I'm a big fan of the work of the Gallup organization around strengths-based leadership.
oh, I love Gallup.
Okay, and
Fantastic organization.
amazing organization. Just the
I'm,
deep dive that they've done, and just sort of how they've managed to make it relevant in a lot of different silos is just amazing. I actually had my kids go through Strengths
oh,
Finder.
you did
Uh,
good.
oh yeah, and before my wife and I got married, I had her do Strengths Finder as well. So I could see sort of what I was working with, and what I was working with, who I was going to be marrying, and I also have worked and facilitated Strengths Quest with 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. And my background comes out of higher education, working in student affairs. And so working with a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds over 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you do get to see the waves come. You get to see them come and go out and come and go out. And so you realize how quickly things change. But with Strengths Finder and with Strengths Quest, one of the pieces of pushback I guess I get from organizations and I don't often suggest that they do it. And I do like how you use the term large lumbering organizations, and you're correct. They are large lumbering organizations. But sometimes when I intersect with those, they're still so stuck in the Industrial Revolution mindset
Exactly.
of people as widgets
Exactly.
versus people as people, that when I say strengths quest and when I say maybe you should evaluate people and maybe attach compensation on the basis of what people do well versus what people don't do well, I'm literally hustled out of the room.
Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, they're so entrenched in doing things the old way, even though it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going there. And so I heard a statistic that by 2020, a huge percentage of Fortune 500s will no longer be in existence.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I don't know if that was a Gallup report or something I got off of Harvard Business Review, but it was stunning to me that
Mm-hmm.
might be the case. And if it is the case, like I say, I believe that we have a generation of people who can really make a huge difference.
There are the number that I always hit people with, and I have HR managers that stare at me as if I've grown a third head when I say this, but I say there's 80 million millennials.
Yes, it's huge demographic.
65 million baby boomers, 80 million, there are 15 million more millennials in the workforce, and there will be 15 million more in the workforce by the peak time of baby boomers retiring, which is coming in about 10 years or so, give or take a few years.
Well,
And organizations aren't ready. They're just not ready.
Well, and they say that the biggest concern, and this was a forward projection, one of the biggest concerns companies will have in the year 2020 is how to attract and retain the best talent. And this is the problem they've got now.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you know what? And you know what? By 2020, Dianne will be like, you know what? I told you so. I was talking about this 5 years ago.
I've been talking about this for over 10 years.
Right. So, and then one last thing, and then we'll go into your project. But I know I always keep saying one last thing. That's my move. Oh, one last thing. I'm like Steve Jobs. Oh, and here's one more thing. When you talk about millennials, and I don't like that term, but it's the one that's in common parlance, so it's the one I use. I think younger workers are younger workers are younger workers. One of the things that I saw on HBR this summer was a whole series of articles focusing around can HR be saved? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you saw any of those articles, but one of the thrusts of them was that HR has to significantly shift its perspective and focus away from being exclusively policy and regulatory based. Mm-hmm. And it has to shift its focus towards exactly the kinds of things you're talking about. Developing leaders internally inside of the company, really offering training opportunities for development at scale inside of large organizations, or else HR will be rendered irrelevant. Now, I do a lot of intersection with HR in a very, very post-industrial landscape. I mean, upstate New York, I don't know how much you know about the city of Endicott, but it used to be the home of IBM. Mm-hmm. Very post, and now IBM is no longer here. Very post-industrial, and everything that kind of goes along with that sort of psychology that a large legacy organization brings to a geographic area and its economy and its people. When I talk to HR managers about this, it's one of those things I get hustled out of the room over, or they'll quietly whisper to me, "Yeah, I know, but my boss doesn't believe in that," So how do we shift the conversation among not the gatekeepers, because most of HR serves as a gatekeeper, but they know what's happening. So how do we shift the conversation with executives who are still, they're looking at the stock price, if they're a publicly held company, they're looking at the stock price is going up. What do they care? How do we shift the conversation?
Well, we actually have one example of that shifting conversation right now. This was a woman who attended one of my online webinars. Mm-hmm. And it was one that HR.com invited me to present at one of their conferences, which I did. And she's an HR director. She sits in a director's seat and lives in St. Lucia.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and her company is transforming itself from a global 4-star to a global 5-star. It's 2
Okay.
boutique hotels.
Okay.
And she's commissioned with the change piece. They put it in her lap, an HR director.
Hmm.
So she became licensed with us, and to make a long story short, she is now in the process of transforming this organization. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting, when you have a colonized community of people, you behave in possibly different ways than if you're haven't been colonized. And uh, so the skills that people had in the workplace were showing up as little antagonisms, little conflicts
Mm-hmm.
that were totally unnecessary, because their 4-star resort isn't because their facilities are lacking at all. Their
Right.
4-star resort was how people were treating one another and the relationships, and then how that spills out into the client base. So
Yep.
right now, she has staff asking for this training and that training. She says, I've never had always, when I held a training, people would come with their feet dug in, like, I have to be here. And now they
Mm-hmm.
want to be here.
Yep.
So they know that they're getting developed, and they're able to face their weaknesses without fear of retribution
Right.
and say, you know what, can improve, and it's
Mm-hmm.
safe for me to do so.
Right.
So it's a wonderful
Right.
case study in the making, and maybe we can talk about that or bring her on at some other time, because it's a fascinating case study of an HR director who is in the role of developing staff in alignment with workforce and growth objectives. And
Talk to me
it's
about. Yeah.
fantastic.
It is fantastic, and I'm blown away by that story. I'm blown away by an HR director sort of leading the charge on that change, and that's exactly what Harvard Business Review sort of concluded at the end of their series during the summer around Can HR Be Saved? HR directors and HR people in general are going to have to literally take their own destiny in their hands and the destiny of the organization and propel it forward to where it needs to be.
Absolutely.
And again, sometimes that's really hard if a senior VP or VP doesn't get it. But
Well, one of
it's
our projects was to elevate HR to a VP seat for a
yes.
major energy company,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to prove that there was profit in HR. That HR is
Mm-hmm.
not an expense item to manage and move around widgets.
Mm-hmm.
Your widget analogy, I thought, was excellent. So when HR is looked at as a profit center,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a cost center,
Right.
and it's moving
Yep.
in direction, it's like it's building the workforce to the capacity that is needed for growth and change.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think when the board of directors in major companies see this, it will happen. And of course, it's going to happen much sooner in the small to medium-sized business range, with people who are being educated by you and your podcasts.
Right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I agree. Well, you mentioned, dynamic opportunities. So let's segue into the dynamic opportunity that you're developing right now. And let's do that by talking about how did you talk us, and this is an entrepreneurial podcast as well. That's one of the things that I love talking about entrepreneurship, because I believe that this current generation that's coming into the workforce, while they crave, I won't say security, but while they crave change and meaning, I look at the legacy organizations and how long the legacy organizations have been hanging around, and I look at those as two dynamic tensions. You can either go and work for the legacy organization and be sort of stuck in those silos that they put you in, or you can break out and you could be an entrepreneur and build your own destiny. Part of that, and I look at that as the other piece of building a life that you don't want to take a vacation from. And so I love talking with folks on here about their entrepreneurial journey and how they wound up basically, on my podcast. Now, I'm not going to ask you to go into every single step in there, obviously, but talk to us about how did you develop your business? Like, did you have previous years of experience in doing one thing and then you were like, aha, you had a light bulb moment? Or was it more of a, I'm going to start out on this when I'm like 35 and I'm going to gradually build up my portfolio until I'm at this place?
That's a great question, because I did come to my entrepreneurship with some prior experience,
Hmm.
and it was an interesting time. I was in a management position, and I was in wealth management, wealth growth
Okay.
management, and I came to my work on Monday morning and found that nearly 50% of my department was getting laid off.
Oof.
Yeah, here's on. I wasn't brought into that conversation or the planning, and the way the layoffs happened, it was with shock and awe.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
it was
Yeah.
this gut wrenching thing for me, because I knew that people had bills to pay and families to feed, and they were
Hmm.
doing good work. These were not slackers. These were people who were showing up on time, doing good work, blindsided by a pink slip.
Hmm.
And they had no forewarning or time to prepare for this. And at that time, it's like everything converges. There's a perfect storm at times. I was going through a divorce. I had a 2-year-old daughter. And so instead of hunkering down, which would have been the safe thing to do, right? I had a
Hmm.
family raise and everything. I quit. And I entered my master's in org leadership at Gonzaga University.
Okay.
And what I was seeing in the business world made no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, there were good people with skills, and I think that the people who are coming into the workforce now might even this might even resonate with them now, because they were very skilled and they were being sidelined,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and these top down directions that were coming from senior leaders just made no sense,
Right.
because these leaders spent no time getting to know their employees, understanding what their employees did, how they did what they did, and what they needed to succeed. And they didn't coach, they didn't mentor. There was nothing in there for the
Hmm.
growth of employees. And employees do and did dread going to work on Monday morning. So when I
Hmm.
entered Gonzaga, I wanted to know what makes a good group of working people truly great. And I qualified because I was not seeing great. And
Right.
when I, yeah, I was not seeing it. So what is it? And I thought I was going to find some, Ken Blanchard wonderful 1 minute manager thing or something like that,
Yes.
because that's what we were all
Yep.
reading, right, at that time.
Right.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
Ken's still kicking, bless his heart. And
Oh, he is. He's still. You know what? I go to
absolutely.
Barnes and Noble, and he's got a new book out every year.
Oh,
I love that
absolutely.
man.
He is fantastic. And so so I wanted to know what really makes a group great. And I qualified great to mean. I had to put some qualifications on this. So it wasn't just ooh, warm and fuzzy. It
Right.
actually meant something. And so I qualified great to mean that they were ethical, that they were quality focused, that people cooperated with one another. There was no backstabbing, climbing over others, taking people's ideas, claiming them for yourself. All the stuff we were seeing, and I would imagine some people still are to this day,
Hmm.
and that this group was very productive and successful. But success was more than just making money. Okay, success and
Hmm.
goals were being achieved consistently. It was also I wanted to qualify success as meaning that people had that sense of personal satisfaction. I didn't know what flow was back then,
Hmm.
but it in a sense we could call it today sort of a sense of flow.
Yep. Yep.
So there was a sense of happiness in this group. And work, this was no cushy stuff at all. Work could be really tough.
Yep.
But people were
Yep.
cooperating with one another rather than competing and backstabbing. So no one was climbing over everybody's back to get to the top and take the credit. That was not part of this, but made a good group great. And people knew that they were making a difference, and they knew why. And there was
Hmm.
satisfaction in that. So this was a pretty big question. And when I went into Gonzaga, I said, this is the question I want to answer. And they let me create my own curriculum for this. So I did all the group dynamic research I could find in education, psychology, and business.
Okay.
And from these studies, the 6 principles emerged, and they're trust, interdependence, genuineness, empathy,
Okay.
risk resolution, and success, and they form the acronym TIGERS. So then, so what? So the next question was, so what? Is this true?
Right.
So my thesis was developing a team behavior survey. And what we wanted to know is if these 6 principles could be broken out in group behavior. It wasn't just a big glop of good behavior or a good glop of bad behavior. You could actually separate out these 6 principles to get some idea of what was going on with the group. Okay. So once this study was concluded, it received, tremendous review. But there was also the question, can it be repeated?
Right. Yeah. Hey, is it repeatable? Yeah, exactly.
Is it repeatable? So the State of Washington Education Association came to the plate, and as a whole, at that time, education was changing from centralized decision-making administrations to building by building decision making. So you could have like a school district, right, that had the affluent side of town and the not so affluent side of town. And those buildings in that school district are going to require different decisions, different processes, different ways of working with the kids in those school buildings. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I will tell you. I'll tell you my own struggles with. I mean, I have a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old in school. I have my own struggles with the school system. But yeah, absolutely, I would agree with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this was a huge change. This is what we call frame-breaking change for the Education Association. So the union came to the table to use the TIGERS survey to determine what sort of team behavior training was needed on a building by building basis, because they only had so many in-service days for training, and they didn't want to go in and do a warm fuzzy team building thing and have it fall flat.
Right.
So they wanted to know if they had to build trust activities, if they had to build conflict resolution capacity, if they had to build leadership capacity, they wanted to know specifically on a building by building basis what was needed. And after that survey was done, took about 2 years to get the volume we needed for a valid and reliable survey. They came back and said that not only TIGERS could be individually identified, so you knew exactly what to do with the team, it could prescribe other things as well from an organizational development context. So I had I guess what you would say, I had the confidence that I had something that had some meaning to it. And that's when I trademarked TIGERS and hung out my shingle. And I've been doing this ever since.
Awesome. And what you're talking about is something that sometimes people who are in my field, in the field of peace building, sometimes struggle with, which is a sort of systems design process or systems design approach to really sort of systematize outcomes and really look at sort of where those outcomes are and measure them, and then sort of really scale from that. And so from an entrepreneurial mindset, you had a product versus a service, and you were able to scale that product over a long period of time, and that's great.
Well, and it was interesting because the survey, I had all of these different trainings and things I could do it also because it was all part of everything I was studying. But what was interesting about that survey is it turned the corner on peace building activities in companies, because in many companies, learning how to listen so that you could actually resolve conflict was thought of as soft skill training. And there were many soft skill trainings that were so important to leadership development and that are important. How you communicate to people, how do you lead? It's more than just setting goals. It's actually the communication integrity that you have with people, being able to manage projects, all of that. A lot of that has to do with soft skill training, but it was never considered viable, good training because it couldn't be monetized. Well,
Right.
Tigers gave us the ability to show where that change occurs in the bottom line of a client. For example, one of my clients was a large membership-based wholesale and retail organization, now international. And their chief, I was asked to develop 5 days of leadership training. And the operations manager said, "Oh man, this is a waste of money." And I said, "Really? Well, okay, let's take a look at that." I said, "If we did see change here, where would it show up in your bottom line?" Well, he had all sorts of HR areas. And I said, "Well, where else? You know, what tags into HR?" And we got a couple of things. Well, after about 1.5 years of rolling out this big project, this big training, he was really excited. Turned out that soft skill training that teaches people to talk to one another more respectfully and clearly and concisely so procedures are known and goals can be accomplished, all those things reduced their self-insurance rates. It seems that people who are treated with respect and dignity and who are clear about what they need to do and why and how to do it and are treated respectfully don't get angry.
How about that? Yeah.
When they don't get angry, they don't lose focus. When they don't lose focus, the forklift doesn't roll over their foot.
Yep.
Or in testosterone-driven organizations, people aren't throwing up out their backs trying to pick up pallets because they're angry. So it was interesting to be able to quantify the return on investment to improve leadership, which then made workforce development actually possible.
Yep. Quantifying the ROI. Absolutely great. Now, walk us through your current Indiegogo campaign, because you talked a lot about, how you developed and your background and where you came from and sort of your vision for where you see the workplace going. But let's talk through the Indiegogo campaign. Why are you using Indiegogo? How did you wind up in that platform? Why did you think that was a good fit for this new initiative that you're launching? And tell us about the new initiative.
Well, it's really interesting. I started that survey with a pen and paper process. And because it was pen and paper process, I had hired a coder in DAWs, of all things, to develop a way to quantify all this stuff. And it had to be hand entered. And oh man, was it a laborious process. But it got us the results, we needed in working with our clients. And well, about 10 years ago, I wanted to put the survey online, and it took, and I bootstrapped this, and then we hit the recession, and everything slowed down. So it was about a 5-year process of getting the survey up, beta testing it, running it through some of our licensees so they could work it with their clients, and, really working this so that it was a really easy survey to administer, because it's our goal not just to hold it close to Tiger's chest, it's our goal to be able to release it to a lot of different people to be able to use. So we got it up there, and then we started hearing from our licensees that what they wanted was be able to do a company-wide survey, let's say a company with 1,500 employees that's also broken down into departments all in one survey. So what we have now is a wonderful survey that can survey a small company or a department of 8 or more people up to 150 people. And it's one survey. And if they want to do the company too, they do a separate company one. Well, we want to be able to do one that gives not only the company overview, but also department overview so that those leaders who could benefit from coaching and leadership development are given that opportunity and to be able to track and measure that over time. So when I started looking at this campaign, we go out for a loan. And that would be fine to go out for a loan. But this is going to be about a year. I anticipate, since we already have the algorithms and the main process of the survey has integrity now on the website, we just have to expand that. We're looking at probably a year with beta testing. So when you go out after a loan, the interesting thing about a loan is that you have to pay it back monthly.
Yeah, that is one of the fascinating ways that banking works. Compound interest, the monks, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And so that didn't make sense, and credit cards are even worse. So we started looking at it, a crowdfunding campaign, and that when you look at crowdfunding, where I got good feelings about it was that we're actually doing this for a crowd. We're doing this not just for ourselves. We're doing it for people who are on the wave and riding that same wave in we are, want to make the workplace a better place for people. And they may be in Six Sigma. They might be doing things that we don't do, but this survey will be very helpful to them. So I looked at it and I thought, well, it's not just for us. It is for a crowd. So let's see, with good financial stewardship of these funds, what we can accomplish that benefits more people than just us.
Right.
So,
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we began talking to people. And I got on LinkedIn and I was looking at different crowdfunding places, and I was, finding everything I could, Twitter, you name it. I was looking for crowdfunding information. What I ran into was a lot of sales pitches, but a few really, really nice people who were willing to share their process. Now, I have not seen any leadership development or organizational development products. I mean, it's so we're trying to resolve all the risk we can on this, but I talked to some really good people, and I got an idea of what they did to be successful. And many of their campaigns, let's say they asked for 25,000 and they ended up getting, $500,000 in funding. So they were very successful. And it was interesting because I started looking at this, Jesan, at the end of 2013. So we're looking at about a year and a half process to develop this.
Yep.
And I first started looking at what kind of platform I wanted, and that got very confusing for me. So I backed off that to decide what type of crowdfunding program I wanted to run. And there's equity crowdfunding programs, and in my mind, they're not much different than venture capital, and that's kind of
yeah. Well, and you're in Oregon, so I mean, you probably have. I'm just assuming you have access all up and down the West Coast to sort of that venture capital. I don't want to say it's in the air, but sort of the ambiance of venture capital.
And I've seen good companies just go down because the capital investment was so strong, the control was so strong in that, and that can be very good for some people. But it seemed to me it was like more like VC, and that didn't appeal to me. And then I was looking at campaigns where, it was basically a loan. Well, how's that different than a business loan? And then I started, because it's the same thing, you have to start paying it back. And then I started looking at reward-based campaigns. And some of them, gosh, I bought a lot of stuff. I decided, I want to see how these different platforms work. So I tested the platforms by building other buying other people's crowdfunding campaigns. I've got some interesting stuff. I'll
So
tell
what have you
you.
got? Yeah, what have you got in your house? What's in the office there?
Oh,
What are you offering as swag from other people's campaigns?
yeah, it's really neat stuff. And I got this one thing. You really want to know? This is so cool.
Oh yeah, we
I
want
got
to know. Oh,
my
we're
husband.
inquiring minds. We want to know.
My husband is a fisherman, and so
Okay.
imagine a ball with a GPS that can look down into look down into the water and tell you where the fish are. So here you are in a stream, right? And you think,
Okay.
oh, that little drop over there, fish are going to be right below that drop. Well, now you can throw something in and actually see them.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was his Christmas present. But
Yeah. Here, I bought this off of Indiegogo. Here you go. Merry Christmas.
well, and talking about Indiegogo, I bought their products, and holy cow, it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
It was easy for me to buy a product. The
Right.
communication was fantastic. They sent me little messages saying, "Do you like what you bought? If you do, share it with your friends. We'll give you $5 for each one that buys."
There you go. Yeah.
And it was like, really, you perk people even, and their marketing is fantastic. And so I started looking deep into some of their products, and mine isn't so off the wall. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are IT projects, and ours is an IT project
Mm-hmm.
that has a proven track record, but it's some of them are just really way out beyond what would have anything to do with HR. And
Right.
Indiegogo seemed like a good fit. Now, there are fees associated with almost every crowdfunding platform, and
Of course.
Indiegogo is not the cheapest, but I'm not looking at cheap, I'm looking at effective.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're looking at campaigns. Just if you go to the front of Indiegogo, I mean, if you go on your mobile phone through the Indiegogo app, or you go to the desktop, you can see world's best travel jacket, or scenes from the underground of feature film, or a high school theater program looking for funding, or a person looking for funding for a luxury wallet. Made of pure carbon fiber, and that's just like the few ones off the top of the top of the homepage.
There's one for socially responsible businesses, up in Canada. I mean, it drew me in. It drew my attention, and when I bought things from their campaigns, they had integrity, and it was easy for me to do. But it was also for anybody who's contemplating this. Crowdfunding. The very first word is crowd.
That's correct. The very first word is crowd. Most people forget that. The very first word is crowd.
Yeah, they go for the funding and they forget the crowd, and you have to have one. So
right.
These brilliant marketers that were asking for 25 and got $500,000. I mean, they had user groups. They had huge satisfied customer bases that they could go out and ask for funding from, and that's where it came from. So to just think you can put a campaign on a really reputable platform and have it be successful is not necessarily the case. And so we really began to look at the strategies of what people need, and this was in coming out of the recession, and we were in development before that. So we knew that we had to build our relationships, and I took that as the primary goal, as building relationships with people, and building our social networks, and helping people be successful with what it is they're doing, and with mentoring a lot of people, and just really building relationships in that area. And so
with crowd. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, with crowdfunding, like you said, it's the crowd, right? So it's how many Twitter followers are you bringing, and then how many, and then you got to segment off just at a very practical level. How many Twitter followers are you bringing? Just use that platform as an example. You may have developed a 5,000 person Twitter following, but every one of those 5,000 people is not going to see a tweet about Indiegogo. So you've got to segment off which part of those 5,000 followers are actually going to be interested in seeing your tweet, and then which ones of those 50,000 are going to, or even 5,000, are going to then retweet that information to further grow and further that reach. And that's just Twitter. You know, you got Facebook, he's got kind of the same mentality. You got to approach it with LinkedIn. That's part of the reason why I'm reaching out to you. I'm assuming you also have a podcast strategy, you know, for going out and getting on podcasts and talking about this, because this is excellent stuff. And of course, you know, email is huge for any crowdfunding campaign. You know, if you can compose really lovely emails as part of the crowdfunding marketing and get that out to a dedicated list that you may already have and that you've built up over time, that's also where some of that funding comes from.
Yes, and then friends and family. So you're looking at building this crowd, and people who don't take the time to do that, I just don't know what to tell you. You need to take that time. So that we looked at that reward space too, because over the years we've developed trainings, and I've got a couple books, and you know the things that you do in making resources available to the people that you're working with, and they're all really good resources. So I started looking at that, and I thought, you know, it all helps people build communities, working communities, or nonprofit communities, or school communities. It's all help in that community development piece that I think people do appreciate. So what I did is I attached a reward at each level, but instead of making it an either or reward, I made it an and reward. So like in the first reward level is our book. The second reward level is how do you champion employees to champion change? How do you create a program that employees just champion it, just make that change happen? It's a good training, and it's a podcast, and with a book and all of this other stuff that comes to it. But then I'm throwing in that first level too, another book. So my thinking is that maybe a person says, well, I want this, but they have some friends that they could give those other gifts to if they wanted to. And spread it. So it gives them power beyond just what they have purchased for themselves, or funded for themselves, or are rewarded for. And it gives them the power to share with somebody else. So I made it an and campaign instead of an either or.
Instead of an either or.
Yeah, campaign, so that it puts more power in the people to make a difference too. It's not just about us. It's about people who want to help people. And so I created more. So I spent some time really thinking that through. And I wanted to come to this whole campaign with generosity.
There you go. Yes.
And I think that you know, and then we're also looking at launching this in October, although I wanted to create a fun way for people to pass it around. So we created a PDF that's got clickable video in it, and a way that you can pledge. And I mean, it's something fun that you can pass around, and it's not a huge document that buries your hard drive. Right.
Well, and you know what, we're going to have links to all of these resources, and we're going to have links to places where you can go and find out more about Dianne, her website, the Tiger Success Series, her LinkedIn profile, her, you know, and any other places you can find her on social. We're going to have all of those links below the media player in the show notes where this is posted on the hsconsultingandtraining.com website /earbudu. So we're going to have those all posted up underneath in the show notes. You can click on those. You can go directly to her Indiegogo campaign when it launches coming up here, and you can, you know, fund that and really, you know, really put your name on something that is really going to help out with meaning and mattering in the workplace. quite frankly, the workplace that you're working in, or maybe even the workplace that you want to go work in the future. So,
or even your spouse who's working in a workplace that isn't like that. It always comes home grumpy and hates going to work on Monday morning. So.
Exactly. You could it's giving a gift to your spouse, think about it. If you got an anniversary, you got a birthday coming up, or maybe just, you want to say you care, you donate to Dianne's Indiegogo campaign. Well, excellent. Well, thank you, Dianne, for coming on Earbud U. I really appreciate it. We've had a great conversation. Love to get you back on. Find out, where you wound up with the campaign, find out, what you learned during the entire process, and let our listeners know how everything has advanced. Give us, and typically I ask the question here at the end, is there anything you'd like to promote today? But clearly, we've been talking about your campaign. We've been talking about the Tiger Success Series. We've been talking about leadership development as a product and as a competency. But where are all the places, in your own words, where are all the places that the Earbud listeners can get a hold of you?
Well, our website is corevalues.com. That's probably the easiest way. And then on LinkedIn, send me an invite to connect. Dianne Crampton, that's 2 N's, Dianne Crampton on LinkedIn. I'd love to link with you. Same with Facebook. Send me a link and we'll talk.
Excellent. Very good. So we will include links to all your social profiles,
Absolutely.
like I said, below the player in the show notes. And thank you very much for coming on to the Earbud U, Dianne. We really appreciate it.
You bet. And Jesan, thanks so much. I just am so happy to be here and to share. And your demographic is fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.